On May 29, 1953, Tenzing Norgay and Edmund Hillary became the first expedition to officially summit Everest. Exploring the mysteries of the world's highest peak, Mount Everest. Mount Everest is the tallest mountain on the planet, which holds various facts we never knew and is an eternal symbol of exploration and adventure. To summit Mount Everest is the dream of every adventurer out there in the world. Thousands of trekkers and adventurers from all around the world seek to summit and trek to Everest Base Camp every year. It is one of the most famous destinations and a well-recognized peak among 8,000-meter peaks around the world. Mount Everest is surrounded by a number of substantial peaks, including Lhotse, 27,940 feet, or 8,516 m, Nuts, 25,791 feet, or 7,861 m, and Chanks, 24,803 feet, or 7,560 m. Those higher altitudes cannot support animal life or vegetation. However, birch, juniper, blue pines, firs, bamboo and rhododendron grow in the lower areas of the mountain. The highest altitude vascular plant species, a type of herb given the scientific name Saxifraga lignitis, grows at 21,260 feet, 6,480 meters, on Everest slopes. No known vascular plants grow above this point. Musk deer, wild yak, red pandas, snow leopards and Himalayan black bears inhabit altitudes below 16,400 feet, 5,000 meters. There are also small numbers of Himalayan taurs, langur monkeys, hares, mountain foxes, martens and Himalayan wolves. There are only 2 brief time periods when the weather on Everest is the most hospitable for an ascent. The best one is in April and May, right before the monsoon. Once the monsoon comes, the snow is too soft and the likelihood of avalanche too great. For a few weeks in September, after the monsoon, weather conditions may also permit an attempt. By October, however, the winter storms begin and persist until March, making climbing then nearly impossible. In addition to the challenges posed by Everest's location and climate, the effects of high altitudes on the human body are extreme. The region in the Himalayas above about 25,000 feet, 7,600 meters, is known as the death zone. Climbers at such high altitude have much more rapid breathing and pulse rates, as their bodies try to obtain more oxygen. In addition, they are not able to digest food well, and often find eating unappealing, they sleep poorly, and they often find their thinking to be confused. These symptoms are manifestations of oxygen deprivation, hypoxia, in the body tissues, which makes any effort difficult, and can lead to poor decisions being made in an already dangerous environment. Supplemental, bottled, oxygen breathed through a mask can partially alleviate the effects of hypoxia, but it can present an additional problem if a climber becomes used to the oxygen, and then runs out while still at high altitude. There are 2 other medical conditions that can affect climbers at high elevations. High-altitude cerebral edema, HACE, occurs when the body responds to the lack of oxygen by increasing blood flow to the brain. The brain begins to swell, and coma and death may occur. High-altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE, is a similar condition in which the body circulates additional blood to the lungs. This blood begins to leak into the air sacs, and death is caused essentially by drowning. The most effective treatment for both conditions is to move the affected person to a lower elevation. It has been found that the drug dexamethasone is a useful emergency first aid treatment when injected into stricken climbers, allowing them to regain movement when they might otherwise be incapacitated, and thus descend. Mount Everest is difficult to get to and more difficult to climb, even with the great advances made in equipment, transportation, communications, and weather forecasting since the first major expeditions in the 1920s. The mountain itself lies in a highly isolated location. There are no roads in the region on the Nepalese side, and before the 1960s all goods and supplies had to be carried long distances by humans and pack animals. Since then, airstrips built in the Khumbu Valley have greatly facilitated transport to the Everest vicinity, although the higher areas have remained accessible only via footpaths. In Tibet there is now a road to the north side base camp. The southern route via the Khumbu Icefall and the South Col is the one most commonly taken by climber attempting to summit Everest. It is the route used by the 1953 British expedition, when New Zealander Edmund Hillary and Sherpa Tenzing Norgay became the first men known to have reached Everest's summit. The northern route, attempted unsuccessfully by 7 British expeditions in the 1920s and 30s, is also climbed. It is now generally accepted that the first successful ascent via that approach was made by a Chinese expedition in 1960, with Wang Fuzhu, Chu Yinhua, Liu Lianman and a Tibetan, Khonbu, reaching the summit. The east face, Everest's biggest, is rarely climbed. An American team made the first ascent of it in 1983, and Carlos Bula, Kim Mong, and Lou Rycott reached the summit. Perhaps because most of the early climbers on Everest had military backgrounds, the traditional method of ascending it has been called siege climbing. With this technique, a large team of climbers establishes a series of tented camps farther and farther up the mountain side. For instance, on the most frequently climbed southern route, the base camp on the Khumbu Glacier is at an elevation of about 17,600 feet, 5,400 meters. The theory is that the climbers ascend higher and higher to establish camps farther up the route, then come down to sleep at night at the camp below the one being established. Mountain climbers express this in the phrase, climb high, sleep low. This practice allows climbers to acclimatize to the high altitude. Camps are established along the route about every 1,500 feet, 450 meters, of vertical elevation, and are given designations of Camp I, Camp II, and so on. Finally, a last camp is set up close enough to the summit, usually about 3,000 feet, 900 meters, below, to allow a small group, called the assault team, to reach the peak. This was the way the British organized their expeditions. Most of the large commercial expeditions continue to use it, except that all paying clients are now given a chance at the summit. Essential to the siege climbing style is the logistical support given to the climber. On May 22, 2017, reports reached Everest Base Camp of 4 corpses found in a tent at Camp 4, 7,950 meters, 26,082 feet. The ill-fated climbers were presumed to have died from altitude sickness, and were discovered by a team sent up the mountain to retrieve the body of a Slovakian climber, who had perished on his ascent 3 days earlier. When it later transpired that none of the climbing agencies on the mountain were missing any climbers, or at least had none that were unaccounted for, confusion arose as to who the 4 climbers might have been. As news sources worldwide reported the tragedy, the Nepalese Tourism Ministry spoke out and revealed that they thought the bodies to be those of climbers from one of the previous year's expeditions. only for matters to be further complicated when it was discovered that none of these had reported any unaccounted for climbers, either. The case remains open, and just another of the manifold mysteries to have befallen Earth's highest and most mysterious mountain.